in other news, we also had the gun sales numbers for 2021 come in, and unsurprisingly, they were huge. They were the second best on record. It's another trend we've been following all year, right at the reload. Sales were not as good as 2020, but they were better than any other year on record, and quite a lot better than 2019 as well. And so you've sort of seen this new normal settle in, with sales at 18.5 million is the estimate for 2021 from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which analyzes the FBI's background check numbers, because there's no gun registry in the United States, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's actually illegal under federal law because people fear that a registry would lead to confiscation, obviously. And so there's no way to directly track all gun sales, and there's no way to get a perfect account for how many guns were sold each day or each month or each year. So instead, we use the background check numbers, because those are required on all new sales of guns, because all new sales of guns go through licensed dealers, and all licensed dealers have to do an FBI background check for each sale that they make. So you get a close approximation of what the sales numbers are from the FBI's background check data numbers. Now, there's a number of reasons that it's not exact. If you just looked at the raw numbers, you would be wildly overestimating how many sales there are, because the FBI's background check system is also used for gun carry permits in the vast majority of states. Although obviously, as we've been talking about, a lot of states are moving away from a permitting system altogether. But some states, like Illinois, for instance, will not only check you when you get your permit, but they will recheck you every single month that you have the permit. And so that leads to hundreds of thousands, and in the end, a total for the country, millions of checks that don't have anything to do with actual gun sales. And that's why we look at the National Shooting Sports Foundation's analysis of these numbers to get a better idea of how many of them were actually for gun sales. But that's a long explanation just to give you guys the background of how this all works. But it's all to say that we had a lot of gun sales in 2021. Sure.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think you had in your piece something like a 40% increase from 2019 to 2021. Mm-hmm. So even though 2021 isn't the record year, you still saw a 40% jump from the pre-pandemic spikes and the pre-civil unrest spikes. So that's pretty substantial for a new normal to be 40% above baseline.
Yeah, absolutely. It's down 12% from last year. We're in 2022 now, but it's down. 2021 was down 12% from 2020. But yeah, as you said, it's up 40% from 2019, which does give you that indication of this new level of demand being sustained. It wasn't just a one-year spike and then back down to levels that it had been at before. In fact, it's something that's going to level off a lot higher than the previous record, which is sort of indicative of how things have gone throughout the years in the gun industry. You'll get a big spike, it'll come back down, but the new normal will be higher than the previous normal. And so you're seeing that again here. The interesting thing to me, and there's going to be a Reload members piece on this, but December and the fourth quarter of 2021 were actually still lower than 2020, which is pretty fascinating. What the industry went into a little bit more of a slump than maybe I would have expected them to, because you saw like Black Friday's numbers, for instance, were up over 2020, but December's were down. And I think there's a lot of interesting takeaways from that, because there was a point where it seemed like perhaps 2021 would catch back up to 2020 in the second half of the year, because a lot of the things that drove the huge sales numbers in 2020 came in the early part of 2020. In March, obviously, with the onset of the pandemic and all the chaos that surrounded that. And then in June, you had the rioting that occurred across the country and the racial unrest from George Floyd's killing by a police officer in Minneapolis. Those things led to huge spikes in June. And so that also created a lot of shortages of guns and ammunition throughout the country. And the thought was that depressed demand a bit. And you did see that 2021 actually had higher sales through January and February and then through April. But then it leveled off again. And I had actually expected that perhaps 2021 might have higher sales in December and the fourth quarter than 2020 did for those same factors. But it turned out not to be the case. And I think that's fairly interesting.
Yeah, it's not quite what you'd expect, especially like you said. I think the industry typically expects in those later months in the winter too to have elevated sales for things like hunting or holiday shopping. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting development to see it dip off like that.
Yeah, speaking of the industry, we had Mark Oliva, who's a spokesperson for NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the industry's trade group. They're the ones who put on, SHOT Show in Las Vegas every year, which we'll be at, by the way. So stay tuned for our reporting from Las Vegas. But Mark said the fact that over 18.5 million Americans chose lawfully to purchase a firearm in 2021 is indicative of the values Americans hold of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. So, he's saying that this shows how much value people put into gun rights. And then later on, he also said manufacturers announced significant investments in the expansion and relocation, signaling the anticipation for continued growth. So I think the industry itself has put a lot of investment into sustaining supply to meet the new demand. And that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because a lot of times in the past, during these surges, you've had a big surge in supply on the supply side afterwards, and perhaps wasn't timed well for some of these companies. You saw a lot of companies during the 2013 spike after the Sandy Hook shooting, when there was a lot of talk of implementing new gun controls and perhaps banning, the sale of AR-15s. A lot of companies got into making AR-15s because the demand was just through the roof at the time. And then when demand came back down, as it was clear that wasn't going to happen, that there wasn't going to be a ban on AR-15s, a number of those companies went out of business. So we'll see how well the industry sticks the landing here, I guess, going forward.